Fellas, recently I've been taking a look at the middleweight division and specifically the title picture, and I honestly don't know what the UFC are going to do with the title picture in the next 12 months, or to be completely honest, the next 6 months, because they've announced a lot of fights in the middleweight division recently, and I've realised that there's about 3 different #1 contender fights in the middleweight division right now, and the guy who's actually going to be fighting for the belt next isn't involved in any of these matchups, and I feel like there's going to be a lot of controversy over who fights for the belt next in the next 3 months, so we'll go over all the #1 contender fights. First of all, Strickland versus Costa. This was announced at UFC 302. If Strickland wins this fight, maybe Costa as well, but if Strickland wins this fight, undoubtedly deserves a title shot. He goes out there and beats Israel Adesanya, one of the biggest upsets of 2023. Then he has to fight with Dricus du Plessis, which he lost, but it was, a very, very close fight. Most people thought he should have got a title shot straight after that. And now if he goes out there and beats Costa as well, I think we've got to give Strickland his title shot. But then we also have Robert Whittaker versus Khamzat Chimaev. Whittaker has obviously had the controversial loss to Israel Adesanya, gets a great win over Marvin Vettori, gets finished by Dricus du Plessis, and now he's coming off a good win over Costa. So if he can go out there and beat Khamzat Chimaev as well on top of that, I think Whittaker deserves a shot as well, and same for Chimaev if he can beat Whittaker. And then we also recently got announced that Jared Cannonier is going to be taking on Imavov, and the winner of that might want a title shot too, specifically Cannonier. The guy's got coming off 2 wins, one of them being Sean Strickland, and I know it was a controversial win. Most people thought Strickland should have won, but he still beat him, and then he goes out there and destroys Marvin Vettori. So if on top of all that, he can beat Imavov, who's coming off a good win as well, Cannonier is going to be wanting a title shot too. So as you can see, we've got 3 different #1 contender fights, and the crazy thing is, it looks like the guy who's going to be facing Dricus du Plessis next for the middleweight belt isn't even involved in any of these matchups. It seems like Israel Adesanya at UFC 305 in Perth is going to be taking on Dricus du Plessis. So before that card, we've got Whittaker versus Chimaev, Strickland versus Costa, and I forgot the date of Cannonier versus Imavov, but I think that's before UFC 305 too. So we've got 3 different matchups before the actual title fight. So let's assume that Strickland, Whittaker, and Cannonier win. You've got 3 guys there who rightfully deserve a title shot, and there's going to be so much controversy over who faces for the belt next, because first of all, they've got to wait for the winner of Israel Adesanya and Dricus du Plessis to recover and actually fight again. And there's 3 different guys there who don't want to fight again before a title shot. They want to get an immediate title shot. So I feel like the UFC haven't really thought this through, and this is what I think the UFC should have done in the middleweight division to ensure that the title shot's fair. There's not too many contenders in this division, because look at the flyweight division. They're literally having to give the rank number 10 guy a title shot because there's genuinely nobody else. And then we've got middleweight, where they've got the opposite problem of having too many contenders. And I just think the UFC haven't really thought this one through. So what the UFC should have done, fair play, give Adesanya his shot against Dricus du Plessis. You don't have to give Strickland an immediate title shot. Do Adesanya versus Dricus du Plessis, UFC 305, whatever. Right, they've got a big rivalry, I understand. But I think what they should have done is the #1 contender fight, Sean Strickland versus Robert Whittaker. I don't really understand why Paulo Costa's managed to get a fight with Sean Strickland after losing to Robert Whittaker. He's lost to Robert Whittaker, and he's about to fight the guy who's just been the champion in Sean Strickland. That doesn't really make sense to me. Don't get me wrong, I'm not mad about Costa getting this fight. He looked good against Whittaker even though he lost, but it seems like they're kind of rewarding him for losing, which I didn't understand. I thought Whittaker should have been the guy facing Strickland, because both of these guys are about 1 fight away from a title shot, so face them against each other to find out who the real #1 contender is. Strickland versus Whittaker, whether you want it on the UFC 302 card or whatever, Strickland versus Whittaker should have been the #1 contender fight. If Strickland can go out there and beat Whittaker, 100%, give him a title shot. He deserves it. He arguably deserves it already, so if he can beat Whittaker, do it. And then if Whittaker can go out there, beat Paulo Costa, and then beat the former champion Sean Strickland, I wouldn't mind seeing Whittaker versus Dricus 2 or Adesanya 3, whoever's next. So Strickland versus Robert Whittaker should have been the #1 contender fight in my opinion. I don't know why, like I said, Costa's been rewarded with that matchup. And then I think they should have done Paulo Costa versus Khamzat Chimaev. Obviously, Chimaev, again, he's got a win over Kamaru Usman, and don't get me wrong, I still think Khamzat Chimaev should have been in a #1 contender fight, but I don't think it should have been Robert Whittaker, to be completely honest. I think if they're going to give him a fight, they should have done Paulo Costa. He's coming off a win over Usman, but it wasn't the most impressive, and Usman wasn't even ranked in the middleweight division. So I think they should have done Khamzat Chimaev versus Paulo Costa, maybe like a backup for the title fight or the next #1 contender fight, because I mean, it was scheduled before. Since they've been scheduled, Costa's obviously lost to Robert Whittaker in a close fight, and Khamzat Chimaev beat Usman in a close fight, and I still think it makes a lot of sense. It's a big test for Khamzat Chimaev. It's a ranked middleweight. It's a tough fight for him as well. So if he can get past Paulo Costa Costa. That cements himself into the top 5. And I think the winner of this fight, either give them the backup for like a title fight, or they should then be entered into a #1 contender fight from there. Chimaev versus Costa should have happened. They've got a big rivalry going on, and I feel like that fight makes a lot more sense than giving Costa Strickland and doing Chimaev versus Whittaker. I don't hate Chimaev versus Whittaker, by the way. It's a great fight. I just think if we're not, you know, we're trying to limit the contenders, this would have made the more sense. And then in terms of Cannonier, I think Cannonier versus Imavov makes the more sense. But at the same time, Cannonier, again, if he beats Imavov, he's still going to want a title shot. But, you know, the guys he's beaten Strickland, he's beaten Marvin Vettori, so if he can go out there and beat Imavov, I think that should have been I think this should be the backup #1 contender fight. I think Costa versus Chimaev should maybe be a backup, but this should be the backup for the next actual title fight. So let's say Izzy versus Dricus goes down. I think the winner of Cannonier versus Imavov should have been the backup for that. So I'm not a massive hater of the Cannonier versus Imavov matchup as well. I think they've done well with that. I also wouldn't have minded Cannonier versus Brendan Allen. I think that's a good fight because Brendan Allen's coming off 2 good wins to Paul, well, not just 2, but 2 impressive wins recently over Paul Craig and Chris Curtis. So I think Brendan Allen versus Cannonier is also a good matchup. But yeah, there's a big problem in the middleweight division. 3 different title #1 contender fights. Now, again, I really don't know what they're going to do because, like I said, if Whittaker, Strickland, and Cannonier all win, who are they going to give a title shot? Are they going to make them fight another time? Are they going to make Strickland beat Costa and Whittaker go out there and beat Chimaev, and then they're still not going to get a title shot from that? I really don't know what they're going to do. I'm really interested to see what they do because, again, it seems like they give it, like, fair enough, if Dricus du Plessis wasn't facing Israel Adesanya at UFC 305 and there was an actual #1 contender fight, let's say Costa versus Strickland was the #1 contender fight, Strickland beats Costa, you do Strickland versus Dricus at UFC 3 or whatever, and then the backup fight to that, the next #1 contender fight is Whittaker versus Chimaev. But considering that Adesanya is going to be facing Dricus next, or at least it's been rumoured that he's going to be facing Dricus next, I just don't know what they're going to do with these matchups. I don't know who they're going to give the fight to because there's 3 different #1 contender fights, and I feel like they should have matched them up against each other instead of matching up against different fighters because Whittaker, Strickland, and Cannonier are the 3 that, in my opinion, deserve the title shot the most. So face them against each other. Don't give them other random ranked middleweights or other contenders in the division because now we're left with 3 different contenders. Make them go against each other because look at the other divisions. Like I said, the flyweight division where you've literally got Pantoja struggling to find opponents because everyone's either booked or injured, and now he's had to fight ranked 10th Steve Erceg. You've got contenders. Put them against each other. Similar situation. Let's say Bilal Muhammad wasn't the #1 contender in the welterweight division. Then we had Shavkat who wanted a title shot, Bilal Muhammad who would want a title shot, maybe even JDM. But in this division, there's not like a rightful #1 contender fight. Besides Adesanya, there's no one you can look at and say, yes, this guy deserves a title shot out of Strickland, Whittaker, and Cannonier. So yeah, I don't know what the UFC have done. There's a lot of controversy over these fights, and don't get me wrong, I don't mind the fights themselves. I think they're going to be good fights, but I'm just really interested to see what the UFC are going to do in the next 6 to 12 months in the middleweight division. Who is going to get the #1 contender fight, or who is going to get the title shot, should I say, after Adesanya if he wins that? Because if Dricus can beat Adesanya, I really don't know who the UFC are going to give him next. Maybe they'll do Strickland, but then you've got Whittaker who's going to want a shot. You've got Cannonier who's going to want a shot. Unless they do Cannonier versus Whittaker too. I don't know. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on the current situation in the middleweight division. Who do you think is going to be fighting for the belt in the next couple of months? And what do you think about these matchups? Thank you for watching.